Alright, so you've heard a bunch about these mono and polycrystalline cells, and you're wondering which one is right for my home. As a solar consultant, I will help show you the right places to look, the questions to ask, and some simple math to use on your end. So a homeowner, Jonathan, needs a 10 kilowatt system, and he's offered a mono and a poly panel from the large manufacturer Canadian Solar. So there are so many differences, but instead of being too scientific, these are the three most important considerations specific to homeowners. The first is the upfront cost, the second is a return on the investment, and the last one are the three key factors for homeowners to take into account. At the end, I will reveal the decision that Jonathan made.
Upfront cost. What is the main thing you're paying more for with monocrystalline? The efficiency in the dollars per watt. So let's start with efficiency. So what does more efficiency mean? The more efficient, the more power for the same amount of space, because it can convert more of that sunlight into electricity. The average throughout the day for mono is 21.9, and for poly it's 18.15 in this example. This varies a lot by manufacturer, but you can look under the electrical data if you are curious in seeing. And the best case, just use the average between them as a judgment. So why is mono more efficient? The simple answer is that a polycrystalline panel is made from a collage of silicon melted together. So you can see here they grab a bunch of silicon rock, they melt it together to turn it into the polycrystalline cell. That's what causes these flakes and everything, is the fact that it's a collage of silicon melted together. Monocrystalline cells, they actually come from a single silicon crystal. Now, due to the fact that it's all more attached together, the electrons have a lot more room to move around versus the poly that's a bunch of rocks joined together. Therefore, the electrons can move around more, they're more efficient for turning around power. Now, a short point is that advances of technology have made them practically interchangeable in all ways but efficiency. More shading used to be and could be a concern with some older models. So that covers which is more efficient and why, but what about the cost per watt? So with the mono cells, it's higher at $1.06 versus 97 cents for the poly. But this is misleading because the upfront cost of one panel may be more expensive for mono, but the system cost might be better due to the added panels and parts, such as microinverters, DC optimizers, and the labor for the extra time and effort to place more panels needed. This is what we're covering in our next section on your return on investment. Return on investment. Remember that upfront poly may look cheaper, but you have to include the fact that you have to put it on the roof and get to a certain kilowatt, like 10 kilowatts. This means that you have to include any extra panels, parts, and labor into the final price. Now, assuming the same lifetime of 35 years for the panels, this means we're finding the total system cost for the power to find that return on investment. So, before I show you things, we have to understand that the math I use is $300 per one inverter for every two panels. Now, each extra panel gets $100 on top of it for labor costs, and the price of a panel is multiplied by 1.5 times to include racking, workmanship, etc. Now, you can see that the overall space for the poly is much higher than the mono, which of course add more labor costs and more parts cost. So the total with labor and inverters is approximately $37,000 compared to $33,250 for mono. So you can see that your return on investment is much higher with mono as well. But keep in mind that you can find cheaper mono than poly and less total efficiency due to when the panel was made. So depending on the year, the actual price per watt could be different as well. This brings me to the point that if you've ever seen a solar farm, you may be asking, why do you see poly in utility projects instead of mono? It's because they have the space for it. The monos could be better for roofs because they can take up less space. So an interesting fact is that monocrystalline is the most common type of panel for residential projects. For instance, as a solar consultant, the company I work for only offers mono for their residential projects.
So this brings me to the last and arguably the most important point, which is the three key factors you must consider as a homeowner. The first is, do they have a well-established brand as a tier 1 solar manufacturer? There is a lot of tests for tier 1 manufacturers, but this means that they are the highest echelon that you can get, and what they produce is all tier 1. Here are some examples such as Longi, Canadian Solar, SunPower, but there are many more, but I highly suggest you only procure parts from these tier 1s. The next is that they have a standard 10 to 12 year product warranty with a 12 to 30 year linear power warranty. Now, the lack of these warranties can mean a red flag because it is pretty industry standard, especially among the tier 1 manufacturers. The third point is actually, who is the installer? Such as, has the installer worked with your panels before? How long have they been in business? The total number of projects and their overall reviews on sites like Google, the Better Business Bureau, and Reddit. The good question to ask as well is, do they subcontract your work? Because you want to know who you're actually dealing with. Because a lot of times in solar, there's a model called a dealership model, where the salesmen work for a completely separate company than the installers. They sell you a project and they find somebody to coordinate that with you. And that could be fine, they could still do some great work, but I really suggest you make sure that you know if they're a subcontractor or if they're completely in-house. Just so then you have the more information to make the right choice for yourself. If you're wondering, Jonathan decided to go with the monocrystalline panel.